And we're back with another Lakers Fast Break podcast. It's our NBA team previews continuing right here on the NBA Fast Break right here for the Lakers Fast Break. It is Gerald Glassford. Thanks so much again for joining. Right there. Let's head to the Great Lakes of Minnesota, and where better to go as far as someone who writes about the Minnesota Timberwolves right there for you on Dunking with Wolves, part of the fan-sided experience. It is Eamon Cassels. Eamon, great to have you here as part of the Lakers Fast Break, and thank you again for taking the time to speak to me about the Minnesota Timberwolves.
Yeah, absolutely, Gerald. I appreciate you having me on. And yeah, super excited to talk about the Timberwolves. I think they're in a really interesting spot. And yeah, there should be a ton to talk about here. So yeah, let's get into it.
All right, let's get into it indeed. Obviously, it starts off with the success that you guys had against the Lakers in the first round of the playoffs. I do want to go ahead and make sure that this noted the great success of that as far as 4-1. It was a definitive series victory for Minnesota. Of course, the last game where Rudy Gobert dominated. You get into as far as the conference finals before falling to the OKC Thunder. Trying to take off that success 2 years in a row, Western Conference Finals, but still not yet to break through. It seems like the team, you're in a precarious position as far as the team is, I think, as far as what they need to do to make tweaks to get them over the top and into the finals. But if they tweak too much, that could essentially take things away and maybe a free fall could start.
Yeah, most definitely. I think what the Timberwolves have done so far this offseason, and I think what they're really going to lean into this year is their continuity. And I think that's a smart decision. You look at last season, they make the Julius Randle trade, of course, just days before training camp. And that definitely benefited them in some ways, but it also caused them to get off to a little bit of a slower start. But towards the end of the season, then, of course, in the playoffs, those first two rounds against the Lakers and Warriors, we really saw the benefits of that trade. They ended up going 17-4 in the last 21 games, and then of course two dominant series against the Lakers and Warriors. So I think you sort of just have to play it out with this core. I mean, it's pretty hard to get to back-to-back conference finals, and I'm perfectly fine with them not making any major moves this offseason. Obviously, they were involved in a lot of rumors, most notably for Kevin Durant. But I think this continuity is going to benefit them, and I'm sure we'll get into it later. But I am really high on some of these younger players taking a step up, and I think they're ready to sort of get more minutes, especially Dillingham and Shannon. But yeah, we'll get into that part later. The big loss, I guess, this offseason would be Nickeil Alexander-Walker. I do think it's a little bit easier to navigate that when you have a guy like Terrence Shannon Jr. who proves he can play minutes at the highest level in the Western Conference Finals, giving them some really solid minutes in those last two games. So I'm pretty high on this team's offseason and the way that they project, and I think the other big thing is that Anthony Edwards is still just 24 years old, which I think a lot of people might forget about just with how much success this team and Edwards has already had. I think that might go a little bit under the radar, but when you have a star that young, the future is always going to be bright, and I think they're really well positioned to win both now and in the future.
One of the things I do want to ask you, it starts with the guys that you had signed or were going to sign or didn't sign in the off season. And I will ask you this on that. You had 3 free agents going into the off season. You were able to sign 2. You brought back Naz Reid. You brought back, of course, Julius Randle, both integral parts of the rotation. And the other integral part, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, he decided to go to Atlanta. Tell me your thoughts. Would this have been the way that you chose to go? Let's say you're running Minnesota and you had those 3 and you could only commit to 2. Are these the 2 that you would have committed to, or would you have maybe gone with Na and maybe someone else, or would you have signed all 3, 1, 3? Which direction would you have gone in regards to those 3 free agents?
Yeah, for sure. I do think Tim Conley and company really did make the right call here. When you look at re-signing all 3, I guess technically it's possible, but then you're going into the second apron for another year. So I think that's a little bit challenging. I feel like we've seen really every team in the league try to avoid the second apron. So I think that's probably the right move. And if you look at Na, I think he is just the most expendable. That's not to say that he doesn't bring value. He clearly brings a ton of value. He's a really solid perimeter defender. Can provide some secondary creation, some spot up shooting, some ball handling even. So he is super valuable. But when you have two guys in Terrence Shannon Jr. and Jalen Clark, and then Rob Dillingham to a lesser extent, he doesn't play the exact same position or role. But when you have those three young guys really ready to take on bigger roles, I think it just makes a little bit more sense. Whereas if you look at their front court, they do have some young talent, especially with Johan Berenger, who they did draft in June. But at the same time, Berenger is very raw. He's 18. He's going to turn 19 in November. So I don't think he's ready for a bigger role. And yeah, frankly, I mean, just putting it simply, Randall and Reed are just far better players. So even if there is a move down the line for whatever reason where you have to trade one of them, I think just retaining them is just a top priority. And I don't see that scenario where they have to trade them as necessarily likely, but it's something to maybe keep in mind. But just how valuable Randall and Reed have been to this team. Randall obviously just this past year, and then Reed throughout the past 2 years. I think it was sort of a no-brainer keeping them. When you look at Randall, I think he is a really nice fit next to Edwards, just based on his abilities as a secondary creator and playmaker. I think he showed a lot of playmaking, which definitely flew under the radar a bit, but you really do need that second option next to Ant. And then Naz Reid has one of the more unique skill sets in the league as a shot creating big who can space the floor, handle the ball, and create his own shots. And I think that's just so valuable off the Timberwolves bench. We obviously saw it with him winning Sixth Man of the Year back in 2024. So really a no-brainer to keep both of those guys in my mind. And I thought value-wise, they did pretty well. I thought Randall's contract was actually going to be a bit more, so I thought that was just excellent value. And then Reed, it was maybe a little bit more expensive than I anticipated, but at the same time, I think that's sort of the price you have to pay to keep great role players in this league nowadays.
Once again, I'm on with Eamon Cassels. Please go ahead and check out the great work that he's doing today. It's part of the fan-sided experience with Dunking with Wolves right there for you. Go ahead and check that out, along with all the other great work that he's doing on fan-sided today. Wanted to ask you this, Eamon. The age on that team, great in one spot with Anthony Edwards, which we'll talk about here in a second, but with Mike Conley and Rudy Gobert. Rudy Gobert, again, had the dominant performance against the Lakers, but he is getting a little up there in age, so it is a little bit of concern for what he's bringing back. Still a very good value as far as the defensive and rebounding end. But then you have Mike Conley, who the ever ageless, again, who'd have thunk that in that Ohio State draft coming out that he would be the guy that would be the most remembered from that draft and not Greg Oden for altogether different reasons. So that I'll go ahead and say is, but Mike Conley is possibly seeing as far as more time resting, more time, more days off. That has to be filled up by the new guys as far as the rookies from last year that had so much promise in Terrence Shannon Jr. and Rob Dillingham. Primarily, Rob Dillingham has to take that next step. In making those draft picks last year, it seemed like Minnesota was taking a definitive step before for deciding exactly how they want to build their future. So as Rudy Gobert and Mike Conley start to age out a little bit more this season, it's up to Rob Dillingham and Terrence Shannon Jr. to pick up that slack. With also the fact that they lost Terrence TSJ has to step up in that end, and Rob Dillingham has to take more of the slack as far as the play calling as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you really nailed it there. When you look at this team, especially their point guard position, they're really counting on Dillingham to have a bigger role, and I'm pretty confident that he can do so. I'm really high on his skill set. He's a really special shot creator, and yeah, he is a little bit smaller. He's 6'1", about 175 pounds. So yeah, that's a little bit of a concern. But at the same time, I feel like in recent years we have seen smaller guards really have high level roles in this league. So I'm confident that Dillingham can do it, and he didn't play much as a rookie, but at the same time, when he did play, he showed some really solid flashes especially as a scorer. He can really score at all three levels. He has just incredible ball handling abilities, and he's a really solid playmaker, which I think gets a little bit underrated with his game. So I'm confident that Dillingham can fill in that role, although it is a bit of a risk, and you always have to acknowledge that he's still just 20 years old, and for a guy that really didn't play much, going from that to maybe playing around 20 minutes a game with Conley getting a reduced role is always going to be a bit risky. But then you look at Terrence Shannon Jr., as you mentioned, really filling in that Nickeil Alexander-Walker void. I am confident that he can do that based on the fact that sort of like Dillingham in the limited minutes he got, he really thrived. But we saw that a little bit more in the playoffs with him. Scored, I believe, 35 points in the last three games of the Western Conference Finals, which is just a really encouraging sign. And he's just a naturally gifted scorer. And then he's a really high energy defender as well. Solid playmaker along with that. So I do think he has what it takes. And him being 25 really benefits him in the sense that he's not going to maybe have as much growing pains as a Dillingham, who's younger and doesn't necessarily have the ideal size for the NBA. So I'm very confident in TSJ as well. You look at Gobert, it's interesting. He definitely had sort of a down year offensively, and that's never really been his strength. And then you look at that with him turning 33 this summer. And I do think that has to be a little bit of a concern with this team, although he's still a great defender. And then you look at Baron J, who I mentioned earlier. He's going to be that ultimate successor for Gobert, but I think he's going to take some time, and I don't know how much he's going to play as a rookie. So I do kind of worry if Gobert takes another step back. What are they going to do? Are they going to lean into Nas at the five a little bit more, which has its benefits offensively, certainly, but is maybe a little bit concerning on the defensive end of the floor? Does Baron J maybe get a bigger role? I think those are all sort of questions you have to ask yourself. But at the same time, I do think this team is positioned nicely. And then I do think looking at Conley and Dillingham and then Gobert and Baron J, I do think they sort of have the perfect mentors in place for them. Just if you look at Conley and Gobert, they're just incredible professionals, obviously had super successful careers. And I think surrounding that with some of the young guys will really benefit them.
The thing I'll say is with Berenger, I would like to see him get minutes consistently throughout the season because I do believe he has a decent amount of talent. I got a chance to see a little bit of his work in Summer League here in Las Vegas, and I was impressed, especially on the defensive end. I know he had one game where it was like 5 or 6 block shots, or 7 actually, if that's the case. So he, that end he is already starting to develop at an NBA level. But we've seen the reluctance in Minnesota last year with the talented rookies that you had. Rob Dillingham and TSJ, Terrence Shannon Jr., did not get minutes until TSJ started to eke in a little bit in the rotation at the end of the season and showed some signs actually in the playoffs as well, giving you guys hope for the future there. I think, well, like you said, because of the possible erosion a little bit of, just because of age and wear and tear, whatnot with Rudy Gobert, it might come to the point where Joan is needed a little bit more sooner rather than later. But will he get that opportunity? That's the question, because rookies, I guess on Minnesota, as we've seen, at least right away, are not going to get any kind of burn, at least at the front end of the season.
Yeah, I think that's a great point there. Chris Finch has certainly been a little bit reluctant to play some of these rookies. I do think it is a positive sign. I saw an interview with him this offseason where he discussed expanding the rotation to 9, maybe even 10 guys. I probably see that number ending up being 9, but who knows, maybe it could be a 10-man rotation, and I think that will really benefit some of the younger guys. It will, make them comfortable playing some minutes, and it'll allow them to grow a little bit. And I think you look at the NBA right now, you really do need to have young guys in place just with how restrictive the second apron can be. Getting those guys on cheaper contracts is just a massive benefit. And then specifically for this Wolves team with a couple of the guys potentially aging out of the core, it's definitely something that's necessary. I think with Baron J, I do think he'll play sort of here and there. I don't think he's going to necessarily be that mainstay in the Wolves rotation, but I do think we'll see him get some level of opportunity, especially if it's a game where injuries arise. And I think Finch really understands how important it is to develop these guys. I think he has sort of learned from last year a little bit, and he does, just based off the sort of vibe I'm getting from some of the interviews. He does seem a little bit more open to playing younger guys, especially a guy like Baron J, who just started playing basketball in 2021, so he doesn't have a ton of experience. I think getting some NBA level reps will be massive for him, and I think Finch understands that. If you look at the Oklahoma City Thunder, what they did last season, even with it's a little bit of a different example, but with a guy like AJ Mitchell, who was their, I believe, first round pick the year before, maybe he was an early second round pick, whatever the case may be. They really found ways to get him minutes throughout the season, and I think that really benefited them, and that's something that Mark Dagnall has continued to do really throughout his time there. And I think sort of looking at that and then a few other examples throughout the league, I think Finch can find a way to really integrate some of those younger players. But it is sort of a tricky situation for the Wolves because they have title hopes and Finch is really trying to prioritize winning, but at the same time, you do have to develop that or balance that with the development of these young players.
Now, the strength of your team is obviously at shooting guard, where I think right now, especially if Dante DiVincenzo gets back up to the New York level that he was in the season prior to coming to Minnesota, if he can get that back, that moxie back, that swag back, obviously that makes it a lot easier and puts him as a possible six-man of the year contender alongside Nas Reed. But Anthony Edwards is someone who at 24 is just coming into his own. Someone who, I know that we talk about the perennial MVP candidates. I know we've got one now that now that he's healthy is looking like an MVP candidate, but people sort of discount Anthony Edwards from time to time because they say he doesn't always focus during the regular season. Tell me your thoughts. A lot of that may be due to age. As he matures, he realizes and understands what he needs to start doing to build his legacy. Tell me about your thoughts on Anthony Edwards and what kind of steps he can still take, because we've seen greatness at times from him, but I think a lot of people are still waiting for him to put everything all together.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think with Anthony Edwards, here's a guy who just he keeps improving every single season, keeps adding different elements to his game, and I think that's really benefited him so far throughout his career. The biggest example of that, of course, would be last season with him adding that 3 point shot and becoming going from really sort of a league average, maybe slightly above average shooter to legitimately one of the best shooters in the NBA. He ended up leading the league in total 3 pointers, increasing his volume and efficiency at the same time, which is just super rare. Developing a really nice pull up game, which has been an area of growth for him specifically. He's always been a really nice spot up shooter, but he developed that pull up game last year, and it just took his overall scoring to another level, and then especially as a shooter. And it really benefited this Wolves team after trading away Karl Anthony Towns and losing the floor spacing that he provides there. Ant was really their main source of shooting and spacing, and he really kept the Timberwolves afloat for a lot of the season with just how great of a shooter he is. I think when you look at areas of improvement, the next logical area would be playmaking. That's sort of an area where he has shown solid flashes in the last couple of years, but at the same time, that you can sort of see some of those struggles, especially in that Thunder series. He wasn't the best as a playmaker. I think he just needs to make a little bit quicker reads. I do have confidence that he can develop that just because of his age. But at the same time, I'm definitely looking to playmaking as the next area of growth. And if he can be a guy that maybe averages 6 or so assists and it's paired with winning, we could potentially see him breaking into the MVP conversation. I think the other thing is just he needs to get more used to being double teamed. I think the last couple of years, as he's established himself as that clear top seven-ish player in the league, he's been double teamed a lot more, and that's something he's had to adjust to, and he's still sort of learning to make the right reads when he's double teamed. And yeah, I think that can be the next area for him, and if he has that playmaking, he'll legitimately establish himself as just a no-brainer top five guy, and I think it would be paired with winning for the Wolves, so I do think he can sort of break into that next echelon of stars.
So, with that said, let's say everything goes right. The team is able to overcome the loss of Na. They maintain good health and go throughout the season, motivated to try and take a level higher. than they've been in the past 2 years, getting to the conference finals, but wanting to obviously extend that even more. Let's say everything goes right, because I think both thing that the team I follow and the team you follow, what they have in common are very similar, that both of these teams are projected just outside a bubble, the bubble that currently resides with OKC, Houston, and Denver, most commonly thought of as the top three in the West by most analysts. So, with that said, uh, if everything went right, how far do you see this team going?
So it's a tough question. Like you said, just because how loaded the West is at that top. But I do think this team. I think a few things would have to break their way, potentially like injuries and stuff like that. I do think they have a championship ceiling. Just seeing with how talented they've been in the playoffs, the two-way balance of this team, and the level that Anthony Edwards can reach. And then I do think they have the depth that is required. They have the ability to really score a lot of points in offense and lock down on defense. So I think that balance is really there. I do think Randall's a second option level guy on a championship team. I right now I'm not going to predict that they're going to make it out of the West or anything, and I would probably have them as that fourth ranked team. But at the same time, if literally like everything goes right, the young guys are developing nicely. Edwards takes another leap. Randall looks like the Randall that we saw in the playoffs. Maybe a guy like Jaden McDaniels takes another leap. I do think this is a team that could really win it all potentially. I do think that's not the highest probability in the world, like I said, but if everything goes right, I do think that's the ceiling that this team has.
Once again, it is Eamon Cassels. Please go ahead and check out what Eamon is doing today as part of the fan-sided experience with Dunking with Wolves. But before we head it out, we always ask our guests who are doing these team previews exactly what they think of the Lakers. Honest opinions is what we want here, and it helps formulate my opinion on what I might think that the Lakers might do this season as well, because of so many people think one way allows me to reevaluate the team and try to take a look at it from a clear perspective. So with that being said, where do you see the Lakers in this Western Conference chase? We talked about how stacked the Western Conference is. Whoever wins, whether it's your team, whether it's my team, whether it's any other Western Conference team, it's not going to be an easy drive to a Western Conference title for any Western Conference team.
Yeah, it's a tough one with the Lakers. The Luka and LeBron pairing looked really amazing when we saw it in the second half of last season. And then they go out and get DeAndre Ayton to really fill that center void. So I am pretty high on the Lakers, and especially if you're looking ahead towards like playoffs and stuff, I do think this is a very dangerous team in the playoffs. I think right now I'm sort of penciling them in as that sixth seed. I'm a little bit concerned about the loss of Dorian Finney-Smith. I thought he was just so vital to their defense, and I thought that sort of flew under the radar. I just don't know how their defense is really going to be able to recover. I'm personally not the biggest Ayton guy, but at the same time, playing next to the playmaking talent that is Luka and then LeBron and Austin Reeves, I do think that will benefit him offensively. But as a defensive anchor, I don't really love Ayton in that spot. And the West is just so loaded, like we talked about. So I'm going to pencil them in as that sixth seed. I sort of have the Clippers just a notch above them with how they really upgraded their depth and how stellar they were to begin with last season. And then the Wolves I have at 4, and then the top 3 teams, sort of as we talked about, OKC, Denver, and Houston. I think that's sort of everyone's top 3 order is certainly debatable there, but yeah, that's sort of where I see the Lakers. But yeah, at the same time, I don't think you can count them out as contenders in any way, just because when you have Luka and LeBron, who are 2 of the best playoff performers and still 2 of the best players in the league, you can really never be counted out of any series that you're in.
So before we head on out, again, I truly appreciate you stopping by. Would love to have you back on during the course of the season to talk about what's going on with your team that you follow, and of course the NBA as well. Would love to have you back on because it's been a tremendous time talking to you. But before we head on out, I call it the cheap plug, where you go ahead and give your cheap plug out there on exactly what you're doing and how people can follow you to follow your great work and catch it on a regular basis.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you having me on the show again, Gerald. It was a lot of fun to talk about the Wolves. But you can find my work over at dunkinwithwolves.com. I'm the site expert over there, so I'm producing daily articles about the Timberwolves. So if you want to hear more of my thoughts on the team, go check that out. And then I also write for fansided.com as an NBA and NFL contributor. So just more of general NBA, NFL thoughts. If you want to check that out, feel free on fansided.com. You can also check out my podcast, The Cassels Cast, mostly an NBA podcast, sort of doing similar things to you, Gerald, as the season previews as the season approaches. So yeah, go check that out. And you can also follow me over on Twitter at Eamon Cassels, just by name. Tweet a lot about the NBA and NFL. So yeah, once again, appreciate you having me on. And if you guys want to check out my stuff, feel free.
Absolutely, indeed. Please go ahead and check out Eamon's great work today, right there as part of the Fansided experience with Duncan with Wolves, right there on a regular basis on Fansided. Eamon is, again, just a great time talking to you about Minnesota, wishing you continued success. Again, I would love to have you back on during the course of the season, updating us on your thoughts about the Minnesota Timberwolves, if that's okay with you, my friend.
Oh yeah, absolutely. This was just a blast, and yeah, I'd love to come on. And yeah, once again, I appreciate you having me on. It was a ton of fun.
Absolutely, indeed. Once again, Eamon Cassels right here for you. Thank you so much for joining us, Eamon, and I look forward to bringing you back on right here at the Lakers Fast Break Podcast.